night, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Citizens Review. I'm Aaron Ferguson, and it's going to be an exciting show tonight. Each week, we try to find new ideas to highlight significant people in our local community. So this week, we decided to scour the country in search of that person who would serve as that special guest to help me introduce the show. Eventually, I ended up at the top of the hill, the Big Red Machine, St. Augustine's College. Now, I'm a Freeport boy, but my mother went to St. Augustine's, and apparently some other very great Bahamian, including today's special guest, the star maker of BTC, St. Augustine's, Lorenz Wright. Welcome to the show, Lorenz. How you doing today?
I'm good.
You good?
Yeah.
You ready to do this show with us today?
Of course.
Now, this is a pretty controversial show, you know, so you got to be ready for some heat. You sure?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Well, you are said to be a good student. I've been told that you got some good grades. You're carrying on bad. You're tearing up Saki in the 7th grade. What kind of grades you got?
A 3.59.
3.59. If I call your principal, she ain't gonna say nothing different. Eh? And what about your involvement? You're involved in school projects. You're involved in clubs and all of that fun stuff.
Actually, yes, I am.
Okay, all right, good. And you're the president of a couple of them clubs.
No,
you know,
not
we
yet.
like leaders on this show. Okay, let me ask you a question. You were involved in BTC's Star Maker. Now, I didn't quite follow that closely, so you're gonna have to break down some of it for me. But what happened on Star Maker? There were different categories, and there were people singing and people modeling and all kind of fun stuff. What was your involvement in that?
Well, I was actually a singer.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah,
Did you win?
no.
You didn't win? Oh, geez. Listen, that's why you just get 3.59, because then you don't win them singing and all that competition. You stick to the books. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Lorenz is the kind of person that we like to have on the show. He's a pretty smart fella and a very good student. I commend you, sir, for coming on this show. You don't look too nervous. Other people, you know, I just have some politicians on here that just be less nervous next to me. I don't know why. But anyway, he's the kind of people we like to have on Citizens Review. Now, our show tonight is going to be a pretty good show. We have activist, lawyer, and financier Paul Moss.
Joining him will be columnist Adrian Gibson, the writer of The Young Man's View, published weekly in the Tribune. Should be an exciting show, huh, Aaron?
It absolutely should. We're going to put these guys to the test and see if we can get some good national discussion going on these issues. We also have a special guest treat for you tonight. Travolta Cooper, who is a Bahamian filmmaker who developed what is called Founding Fathers, the story of none other than the most controversial figure in Bahamian history, Stafford Sands. People call him racist, people say he was by jumping for money, and others call him the master of the tourism model. Have you heard about Stafford Sands?
Yes, I have.
Okay, you heard any good things about Stafford Sands?
Very little.
Very little good. Well, Travolta says he has the true story. So, Lorenz, get the show started for us tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, in living rooms all around the Bahamas, and those of you watching around the globe at www.citizensreviewtv.com, we have an exciting show coming up tonight as we continue to seek the answers with a sense of independence, a sense of accuracy, and a sense of boldness. We are the citizens, and coming up, we will run the review.
Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. I'm Aaron Ferguson. This is Citizens Review. We're sitting here with two very important persons. The first is the local columnist, Adrian Gibson from the Tribune, and Paul Moss, who we all know as a lawyer, an activist, and a financier. Mr. Moss, I'm going to start with you. The Attorney General announced in the Senate that the Bahamas has been moved from the gray list to the white list. Zhivago Lang, the Minister of State, I believe, is in Europe. signing agreements yesterday, on Wednesday, as to getting the Bahamas off the gray list and onto the white list. But I've heard British speculators say that that doesn't actually mean anything. They're going to take further measures to deal with Caribbean tax havens who are signing agreements with countries who agree with them in terms of tax haven status, and they're going to try to railroad this particular setup.
Well, I think that's correct. The reality is that 10 years ago, the Bahamas passed into law 10 or 11 pieces of legislation that was revolutionary and sought to revamp the financial services industry as we knew it then. And that was like radical surgery then. That was what was required for us to get off the blacklist in 2001, which we did. The reality is that 10 years later, here we are again, signing on to TIEAs, which, I haven't seen one. I don't know what really the contents are, and many people, I believe, are in that position. So we sign on to these things to be removed off of a list.
Okay.
But it's only momentary. It's only a short-lived victory because they are and will come back again. And I believe that in order for us to really stay away from these kinds of demands in which we capitulate on in any event, is to really be proactive. I believe that the Bahamas ought to change its tax regime to take on income tax as its model, and thereby align yourself really with the model of the OECD nations, because this is what they recognize. They do not see a country like ours where their citizens could come, buy a home cheaply, live without paying taxes, and then perhaps hide tax money in our jurisdiction.
But some people suggest that the government who introduces taxes is going to be a government that is short-lived. They won't be able to last through the term where they tell us that we have to pay income taxes. What do you say?
That may be true, but you cannot run a government for the moment.
Yes.
You run a government to make sure that the country exists for the generations that are not yet born. And we must do it, because if we continue to be a government that is going to be reactionary, to allow persons from the outside to dictate on the inside what is going on here, and then we do it, even though it's really cutting off our nose, it's not the way to govern. You do what is right.
Sorry to cut you off, but there are some jurisdictions who have taken a low tax approach. So instead of being a tax-free or a tax haven, they introduce 1 or 2% taxes.
Well, this is what I'm advocating now. You see, the Bahamas has such a golden opportunity. None of our competitors who would be considered to be an offshore center have done what I'm suggesting right now. That is to go out there, introduce income tax here, make it up to 3-4%, whatever the case may be, sign double taxation treaties with other nations to ensure that there's transparency, to let the others know in, say, Spain, that your citizen is doing business in the Bahamas, and they're also paying taxes in the Bahamas. Therefore, you ought not to be so harsh on them to tax them again in Madrid or something like that. I think that is the model. And I say this, that if the government or governments are afraid to make that decision for fear of being not elected again or not being elected at all, then you just need to not do that and run the country so that the Bahamas exists for future generations, because our forefathers allowed us to be here because they did things that may not have been popular.
Yes.
But they did it nonetheless. I can tell you that when there was the call for the abolition of slavery, that was not a popular thing.
No.
But it had to happen, and you have to do things what is right.
Well, that leads me to a question for you, Mr. Gibson. In your column in the Tribune, you wrote about the thin-skinned nature of our politicians in the Bahamas. You said, and I quote, "There is no place in local politics for power freaks, and I and many other intelligent Bahamians are not members of the frightened society of that era of the old guard."
Absolutely, and I think Paul would share that view.
Okay.
I believe that today we have a lot of politicians that see themselves as demigods, and we allow them to see themselves that way because you have Bahamians that essentially worship politicians. You know, we don't demand true representation. I think I'll give you an example. The representation that someone like a Brand McCartney provides is something that is new, almost foreign to Bahamians.
Well, I wouldn't say it's foreign. I've seen other representatives really work their community before. But I think that the challenge that Paul presents is that no matter the good MP status, the government itself is still not taking the kind of steps that are necessary and perhaps unpopular, like the abolition of slavery,
I agree.
to get stuff done. What is happening? What kind of society does it say we running?
But to add to what Paul said, you know, any government that truly has a national development plan in place,
Which is none of these
which is none
governments
of
that
the
we've experienced.
exactly, they would understand that in today's time you must have taxation of some form, whether it's value-added tax or income tax, because if you look at it, we are now approaching 50% of debt of the total GDP.
Yes.
And at some point, our dollar is going to be devaluated.
Yes.
Or devalued, sorry.
Yeah, Jamaica is on the brink of complete bankruptcy.
Absolutely, and their economy has practically collapsed.
Yeah.
We don't want to be in that situation where the dollar is devalued. We don't have any real resources in the Bahamas. At least we don't have any serious industries. We are reliant almost totally on tourism. Tourism is the engine that drives nearly everything. We have hardly focused on farming and the development of fishing or the development of light manufacturing industries in this country.
Okay.
And so what do we have as options? You know, where do we turn? Are we going to go back to the days of wrecking and sponging and so forth? Because the slightest happening around the world, whether it's a terrorist attack or whatever it may be, that affects the tourism market and prohibits tourists from wanting to travel, we are up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Moss, you're no stranger to saying what needs to be said in politics. We've seen you do what people call suicide over and over again, and you seem to still stick in. You seem to still maintain your popularity and push forward. Why isn't it that there aren't more politicians who seem willing to do that? What will we end up with at the end of the day if we have politicians that won't introduce value-added tax, that won't make the kind of progressive moves that are needed for us to see the Bahamas work for your children, for the children that I'll have someday? How we end up like this? Let me give you an example. The former Attorney General, Alison Maynard Gibson, gave an interview with The Guardian this week where she cited that there are some 95,000 cases, just criminal cases, in backlog in the system. Now, I can't even begin to fathom 1/3 of our population being involved in a criminal trial of some sort, because 95,000 is virtually 100,000 cases. How did we get to that point? And I submit that if our criminal justice system can't get rid of a backlog of 95,000 cases, then that system too is just as critical to the crime problem as the downturn in the economy.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. I think that there has to be a complete audit to see what those cases may actually be.
Well, that's what she's calling for.
Because really, you may have cases that are so frivolous that you just ought to dismiss them. They ought not to even been called. There's this whole notion of vagrancy, for example, that people who are not able to give adequate explanation to a police officer can find themselves, putting forks out.
Yeah.
And so those cases that have to be weeded out. But I take the point. It's an alarming figure.
Yes.
And if we do not address it, you're quite right that it is contributing and it's as critical to the crime problem.
Yeah, because we can't even, it appears from the 95,000 number that that's not capital crimes. We can't even prosecute little children who thieving from stores.
Well, see, there's so much to what is going on. The Bahamas, we forget, is a third world country. It's a backward country.
Yeah,
right?
Small island economy.
And you have the situation where we do not even give our policemen the training, the tools and equipment to allow them to do their jobs properly. Now, they could recognize a crime and they could make an arrest, But the reality is that you have to present the evidence.
Yes.
And this is where it is all lagging. So there are times when perhaps even the Attorney General's office may be ready to go to trial, but the police is unable to produce the evidence or to have done sufficient investigation short of some confession
Yes.
to show where a person may have the likelihood of being convicted.
And, and to add to what Paul is saying, frankly, it's a travesty that we have so many cases that are contributing towards the judicial morass that we are facing. But what my opinion is this. Firstly, if he's speaking to the police force, we need to look at hiring and properly vetting the new recruits.
Okay.
Because we have some gangsters in uniform these days, man. When you have a case being contingent upon an officer beating someone to receive a confession or to have a confession, I mean, that's a weak case.
And that
The
has
AG's
become
office-
pretty popular
Oh, yeah.
as far as I hear.
Absolutely. The AG's office is not going to move forward with such a case. Secondly, in a small country like ours, we need to encourage more lawyers to either go to the bench or to bring in foreign judges, at least temporarily, because with a backlog in the caseload, I mean, it is ridiculous. It seems like crime is just running right, and there's no way of trying to resolve this issue. And the prison is basically overrun. We need a new prison, man, on some family island or one of those keys somewhere.
Okay, we'll pick up this conversation after we come back from this break. Before we go to the break, I want to read off some of our comments from the website. Jamal says, last night's show was simply put, awesome. It's almost hard to believe we existed as a nation without a voice as independent, proactive, and informed, and charismatic about national issues. Keep up the great work. We'll be right back after this break. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Like I said before, we're here with lawyer and activist Paul Moss and also the columnist from the Tribune, Adrian Gibson. Mr. Moss, this week you did an interview with the newspaper and you said that, now I want to quote you correctly, not as characterized, but you said that if the PLP does not engage new leadership, that they will lose the next election. Let us have you explain your comments for us.
Well, I liken the political parties and my party, the PLP, to a business. And if your customers say to you, you need to make certain changes, you need to do this or do that, X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're going to shop up the road, and they begin shopping up the road, that is to the F&M. You ought to make those changes. It is not good enough for you as a business owner, for you as leaders of your party to simply say, well, they'll come back because the other store has bad management, they're going to go bankrupt, and when they go bankrupt, you'll be right here for them.
And you're suggesting that the prevailing idea is that the people are asking, based on the PLP's leadership, for something new.
I think so. I think that, and this is true with the F&M as well. I could put it in, but I only spoke to the PLP because that is my party.
Okay.
But this is true of the F&M. I did this based on the Elizabeth by-election. Here are two giant parties going at it with all their might.
Yes.
And the reality is they fought a virtual draw.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there are some 17, almost 1,800 people who did not participate.
Yeah.
And if they had, it could have made a difference. But inside that fight as well, there were smaller parties, smaller entities that took away from the victory of those
to the
parties.
tune of some 200 and some votes.
And so that is saying to me that there must be something that is not attractive to the voters out there. And we must find what that is.
Okay.
And I believe that it all starts and ends with leadership. That's where it starts.
Mr. Gibson, let me ask you. You talked about in one of your columns this thin-skinned nature of our politicians. Why is it that no one in the F&M suggests that Mr. Ingram has to go? I mean, you hear that all the time. Christie got to go. Christie got to go. Christie this, that, whatever. Why is it that nobody suggests that about Mr. Ingram, but the draw suggests that leadership is a challenge on both sides?
I agree. I don't know exactly why, but I think it may be due to the fact that Mr. Ingram is in power now.
Okay.
And that may be a part of it. You know, he is seen to be the winner of sorts. And so, as such, he's not pushed out as much as Mr. Christie would be, having lost an election after serving just one term as a prime minister. But to add to what Paul was saying, I must agree that we need change in this country, leadership change. We need true representation in this country. Elizabeth, in my opinion, and that still has a constituency that still has no certifiable winner after a most contentious by-election, showed that the voters are discontented with the status quo. You know, the voters shunned the polls to show, hey, none of you guys, we don't want any of you.
Okay.
You know?
Let me ask you a question about the weighing factors. There's an idea that suggests that the governing party is supposed to win a by-election. But there are competing ideas. This is the greatest recession that we've seen since the Great Depression. Crime is higher than it's ever been. Education is a bigger challenge than it's ever been. There are a number of issues laid out on the table that work against the government. Who wins the argument? Should the opposition have won, in your opinion, or should the government have taken it because they have the ability to, for example, hire 200-300 people in the constituency?
You know, it would be expected that the government would have easily went in there and captured the seat, right? Even though it was more or less a PLP seat, right? But the fact of this, man, I think that what Elizabeth revealed is that the people are not contented, probably not contented with the governance of the country so far. It resulted in a virtual tie, which is not a ringing endorsement for the F&M.
Okay.
They were not, to me, it didn't yield many positive returns for the F&M. And on the same token, it didn't reveal much for the PLP, because here we are with a bad economy, crime out of control more or less, and people are suffering from unemployment, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And the PLP were still unable to capitalize on that voter discontent and have the electorate move with them.
Yes.
You know, so I guess both parties, the people are discontented with, maybe it's a leadership issue, maybe it's an issue of just the times, you know, but I think that the real winners in this Elizabeth by-election, believe it or not, were the third parties. They showed themselves to be the real spoilers. And maybe the real winners in total were those voters that stayed away.
Yes.
You know, because they sent us a clear message. 1,800 sent a clear message that, guess what? We don't want any of you guys, and if you don't improve in the next year or two, maybe the same result will repeat itself.
In fact, someone suggested to me if those voters who decided not to vote were to decide to just throw their votes toward a third party, someone else would have won.
Exactly. Hands down.
Mr. Moss, you're a man of St. Cecilia. You represent that community socially. You're involved. You're there all the time. How has this Blue Hill and Market Street change of road directions affected the people? Is it a good change? Is it a bad change? I want your perspective on that.
Well, I can tell you as a businessman, I know that this is going to be devastating and catastrophic for many businesses on both streets.
Okay.
Because it is quite easy to have customers coming from both directions, and one can turn left or one can turn right in order to get into your establishment. Now, they'll only be able to turn left or right, period. That is going to be traumatic. We saw what took place when they turned the road around on Bay Street, and also on Shirley Street, that killed businesses. In fact, they have yet to recover those entities. Similarly, what took place on the now Tonic Williams Darling Highway, former Harrow Road, businesses died off as well. But I believe, though, that it is going to assist in the better flow and movement of traffic.
Yes.
So you have the progress where the traffic will flow better, and then you have where businesses would have to be innovative in order to survive.
Now, I just want to make this clear for our viewers watching who may not be informed. The government, as a part of the New Providence Road Improvement Project, has decided to change Blue Hill Road to a complete northbound road, one way, and Market Street is complete southbound road, one way. The only part of the formula that I can't figure out is when traffic filters southbound on Market Street onto Robinson Road. How will that sort itself out? Because Robinson Road is a two-way street.
We continue to do things in an ad hoc fashion.
Okay.
The great problem solver for them is going to be a roundabout, which only backs traffic up in any event. The Bahamas really ought to be more progressive than that. We have the opportunity because we're still a relatively young country. We don't have the population as such, but we could do overpasses, at least at the intersection where these roads converge. So the stream of traffic flows over or flows under, as opposed to waiting around a roundabout. But I can tell you, their way of solving that problem is to put another roundabout.
We're not thinking outside of the box in terms of infrastructural development. Overpasses, long overdue.
Yes.
Even a ferryman that could probably take workers from one side of the island to the next. Everybody meet at a certain point. Having a serious parking lot on Bay Street or somewhere. You know, all of these things we don't think about. And I've suggested it, maybe even taking vehicles off of Bay Street, putting a tram on Bay Street.
Okay.
You know, these are all things that we should think of in our infrastructural development.
Well, we have to get Vaughn Roberts on here, who is in charge of the redevelopment in Nassau City, so he could give us some more answers.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back after these breaks with a different segment with Travolta Cooper, the filmmaker and developer of Founding Fathers, Sir Stafford Sounds. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. And I had to include two politicians, but they are what I like to call the rebel group of politicians. We have with us today Renwood Wells from the National Development Party and Omar Smith, the deputy leader of the Bahamas Democratic Movement. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me.
The first question that's on the minds of Bahamians is McCartney's resignation. Now, you two represent parties. I haven't heard from your parties as to what your perspective is on the resignation of Mr. McCartney. Let's start with you, Mr. Wells.
Well, it's an internal issue for the F&M, but to a certain extent, but it's also an issue for the Bahamian people because he was a cabinet minister. I feel Mr. McCartney, in his own professional judgment, decided that he could no longer serve in the cabinet for various reasons. There's all sorts of rumors out there as to why that is. And he made a judgment based upon where he wants his own political future to be, that he would step back from the cabinet. Okay. I find it a little ironic. He said that the country is going in the wrong direction. But he also said the Prime Minister is still the right man for the job. I think perhaps it is incumbent.
Don't quite make sense about that, right?
Yeah, but there again, I think Mr. McCartney is going to have to explain the kind of duplicity in his statement, why it is that he would have said that and said the other thing. So I think persons are going to be asking some questions.
Okay. Mr. Smith, what's your take? What's the BDM's take?
Well, the BDM's take is that's the F&M's business.
Okay.
In addition to that, it shows that there is definitely divisiveness within the cabinet of the Bahamas. And obviously, Mr. McCartney has seen it fit that he no longer can move forward with Mr. Ingram's agenda.
Yeah, but Mr. McCartney is saying that Mr. Ingram is still the best leader for the Bahamas, the best leader for the F&M. How does that compute to both of you? You pointed out the fact that the statement is kind of contradictory. How does that make any kind of sense?
Well, it doesn't. It quite honestly could make sense in that he may feel that he may be the best man at this particular juncture.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that he isn't making mistakes at this particular time, or it doesn't even mean that I may not agree or he may not agree with what Mr. Ingram is doing.
Now, in the analysis of the responses, our team here at Citizens Review pointed out something that was particularly odd. If you go back to I think it was 2004, when Colin Powell resigned from the Bush's cabinet, the response from the Democrats was not, hey, Colin Powell, why don't you come on over and join the Democrats? The response was, the Bush administration is unraveling. The Bush administration is coming apart. His style of leadership is a problem. Colin Powell is a sensible gentleman. He's stepping out. This speaks badly for the Republicans. Why is it, and I don't know if this is your response, why is it that the PLP seems to be more interested in getting Mr. McCartney over than criticizing the government as the opposition party?
Well, I think it's, I don't know if it's necessarily in the Bahamian politics. We've had persons who have moved back and forth across the political divide from time to time.
But it doesn't seem like Mr. McCartney is at all interested.
No,
joining the PLP.
and he said so because he's resigned from the cabinet, but he did not resign from the FNM.
Okay.
He's still an FNM member of parliament.
Okay.
And therein, I think, for me personally, from what I see, I think therein lies the answer for the PLP who is asking for him to come over. He's saying that he's still an FNM member of parliament. He may not feel comfortable under the particular leadership of the Prime Minister in regards to what's going on in the cabinet or even what's going on within the ministry in the Department of Immigration, per se. But he may feel that the Prime Minister, as Omar said, is correct on other things, not that he's not making mistake in this particular area. So the PLP can call for him, but that's a decision.
Don't you think what are y'all interested in inviting Mr. McCartney to join your parties?
Well, listen, Mr. Ferguson, I'll tell you this much. Bahamian politics, like Mr. Wells said, it has a history of people crossing over. And I think, and it also has been successful for the people who have crossed over and left political parties. I mean, even as recent as Mr. Maynard and Mr. Nemore go into the FNM. So, you know, it has bolstered the party that has received these people going over. I guess it didn't work out for Mr. Nottage, probably because he was just going back home.
Well, I mean, he went back to the BLB and he's been quite successful.
But he got a minister. So, I mean, so the fact is, you know, switching parties, you know, has been good for in terms of historical of the Bahamian people. But to answer your question with regards to us, the BDM and Mr. McCartney, I'll tell you something. We understand something. Mr. McCartney, some would argue, was one of the most effective cabinet members in Mr. Ingram's cabinet.
Some argue that.
Some argue that. But you have a problem in our country where you have people who, especially of another generation, who believes that there's a different way of doing things. And when that difference in opinion clashes against the status quo, the establishment which Mr. Ingram stands for, there are problems. And you have two choices. Either, if you're subservient, either you suck up to it and you bide your time, as Mr. Ingram, I think, hinted to Mr. McCartney.
Interesting.
Or you do what Mr. McCartney did. You stick to your convictions, and you live by your convictions. And in this case, some people believe that he may die by his convictions.
Okay, I mean, but he may die by his convictions because he's not seeking to explain to us what his conviction is. He is yet to explain to the Bahamian people in any sort of expansive way why the resignation. All that he has given us is a press release that doesn't really make it clear.
Aaron, let me explain something to you. If he wants a future in the FNM, do you think it's in his best interest to come out and say, well, Mr. Ingram did this?
Well,
Mr.
it wasn't in his best interest to resign in the FNM.
Well, it may not have been in his, it might have been better than staying. Maybe, you know, some of this. Let me tell you what is a rare thing in politics. And when I've listened to some of the talk shows and some of the comments people have said. They said, you know what? Oh, Mr. McCartney, he left, or Brand left. You know, it wasn't the right thing to do. He didn't, you know, he hurt his political career. But you know something, honestly and truly, if you came into politics for the right reasons, if you came into politics to serve and to make a difference, and you are serving under someone that goes against your convictions, goes against what you believe is right, you know, you have to wake up in the morning. And you know what, to be honest, I would suggest that some politicians, they have no problem waking up in the morning looking at themselves because they know what they're into. But some people get into this because they believe in what they're doing, they want to do what's right. And for me personally, I could never go and and do things in terms of my country or compromise myself and look at myself in the mirror. You know, I have children I have to live
I hear
for
you.
and to justify.
Mr. Wells, it was brought to my attention yesterday in a conversation. A gentleman said, listen, Peter Ingram, as we call him on this show, has dealt with this kind of situation before. Peter Ingram started off dealing with Lyndon Pinling himself. Then got to Mr. Christie. In the mix of that somewhere, he got Algernon Allen, Pierre Depuch, Tennyson Wells, all persons who attempted moves at leadership in the FNM, aside from Christie and Mr. Pinling.
Sure.
This can be some serious stuff for Mr. McCartney. I doubt that he even has the kind of support that Mr. Allen had when he started to make moves for leadership. What do you think about that?
Well, there's two kinds of support. You know, there's support within your party, and then there's support outside.
Yeah,
in the
but
general
support
public.
outside is a myth. They
it-
say,
it's-
you know, the people backing you, but we can't even get a good group of Bahamians to sit in Rawson Court and protest against the
But
parliament.
I would say this
so
to him.
the people
But
is an idea.
But I agree with that to a certain degree, but I disagree too, because remember now, the FNM brought in Mr. Ingram. Specifically, I think the best thing that happened to Mr. Ingram was when Sir Lyndon fired him.
Okay.
And he was out there in the wilderness championing, from what Bahamian people considered championing their cause at the time.
That
Because he was
didn't last
seen
too
as a
long
champion.
for Christie.
Yeah, it didn't last too long for Christie. Christie
Okay.
went back. But the fact of the matter is by him doing that, what happened was the Bahamian people say, hey, here's a fellow we could repose some confidence, and the FNM saw that. And the FNM at the time said, let's bring this fellow in as leader. It bolstered their opportunities and their chances. Mr. McCartney obviously have that kind of clout among the people. If you hear the people calling it now, people within his
That's yet to
political,
be seen.
yeah,
We'll
people
know in a
within his,
minute.
well, from his rally that he had where he wanted to give the state of the constituency and his view on his job performance at that time, there was an awful lot of persons who showed up at his rally. And here, I'm not here to carry Mr. McCartney's water. I'm just answering a question. But the fact of the matter is if you have that kind of external support, sometimes it can generate a kind of internal support in your party too.
Okay.
But Mr. McCartney is going to have to, if he doesn't have that, begin to develop that kind of internal support, because what's going to end up happening, and I think this is a very precarious position for him to be in.
Okay.
He says he's not going to resign from the FNM. He has to be nominated by these persons to run again. If he's nominated by them and goes through the next general election, and quote unquote, if Mr. Ingram should be the leader going in and ends up being the prime minister again, is he going to then serve in Mr. Ingram's cabinet?
Buddy, I
You understand what I'm saying? Or is he going to sit on the back bench? If he sits on the back bench, then that a whole other slew of
I don't think
other
he has,
things comes
I don't think
comes
he
to
has
mind.
much plans of sitting on the back bench.
But I would say this. I think that, as Omar has said, what needs to happen in this country, we need to mature. You see, we need to have that kind of maturing that this kind of incident has brought. Okay? In the cabinet of the country, we still like to, when persons want to quiet you, they say that ain't in the Westminster system. You ought to keep your mouth shut. You ought to carry out the instructions of the individual who's first among equals, which is the prime minister, or quote unquote the instructions of the cabinet. We need that kind of openness to where a person can do his or her job. I think the perception is that Mr. McCartney was attempting to do his job, okay, carrying out the laws of this country. And at each turn, he was sort of stifled. That's the perception.
Okay.
And given that under his own professional understanding, he said, I can no longer continue in this way.
Listen,
Mr.
Brentwood,
Smith, I want to give you the last word. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I'll just say this, man. The bottom line is this. You know, Mr. McCartney, we know he is an ambitious young man. He has aspirations for higher office. We know what that higher office is. There's not much higher you can go from being a cabinet member.
Exactly.
And I'm sure this is in the plan for him to get to that position. I'm not sure that as a result of the move that he made, that things are going according to plan. Basically, we just hope that in his actions, that he didn't write a check that his political career can't cash.
My
And that's the bottom
goodness.
line.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here on this show. We hope that Mr. Granville McCartney didn't write a check that his political career can't cash. I suggest to you that the history of Mr. Ingram says that check can bounce. But I don't know. We'll be right back after these breaks. welcome back to the show. I have my able co-host here. How's it going today? How do you think the show was? We had some fun. We talked about crime. We talked about 95,000 cases in backlog. Could you believe that? That's like 1/3 of the Bahamas. We also talked about Stafford Sands. That's a very controversial figure, and I think a lot of people should get the movie to watch it. Don't you think so?
Yes, I do.
Now, we got some more comments from our Facebook. I'm going to let you read off one of them. What are they saying?
Well, Mr. Hunt said, keep providing the facts to the Bahamian people.
You think we providing the facts, or we just talking a bunch of foolishness?
We providing the facts.
You think so?
Yeah.
Man, listen, you're a smart fellow from SAC. If the fellow from SAC say we providing the facts, facts it is. Anyway, I don't want you to get in no trouble today, right? Because I have this segment of the show called Citizens Arrest, and people like this segment. So I just have to make sure that I give them everything that they need in terms of information to lock up these bunch of fellas doing a bunch of crap. So what I'm going to do is let them zoom this camera in on me, so ain't nobody come to kill you. They just kill me, okay? As I said earlier, we got some suggestions from our show. And some people were suggesting that we lock up a bunch of different people. Let me tell you all. Lorenzo said that we should arrest the Minister of National Security. That arrest is coming, Lorenzo. Don't worry about it. Unlike our judicial system, here at Citizens Review, when you do the crime, you got to do the time. So we'll get to those thieving lawyers very soon. Nadia suggests, why don't y'all arrest those thieves called lawyers? Lord, everybody want to lock up these lawyers. We here at Citizens Review feel exactly the same, Nadia, but we can get to them next week. This week, we got a special fellow. This sensitive for me, because I'm from Grand Bahama. And, you know, I was born and raised in Grand Bahama, right between Freeport and 8 Mile Rock, Seagrape to be exact. And as much as I like Grand Bahamians who are watching this show tonight from their living rooms, there's a fellow that like riding in the back of the minister car with his sharp suits on and his glasses tilt down to the tip of his nose. And he always have a newspaper up, reading it on the way to work. He got a nice Grand Bahamian name too, Nico Grant. This week, Mr. Grant, sorry my brother, I know we from Grand Bahama, right? But you're wrong. You're wrong about this one, man. You got to get locked up this week. Mr. Grant decided as Minister of Road Works. A couple of things that I got some serious problems with. He got an accomplice in this too, the Minister of Conflict of Interest. And those of you who know me from radio know who I'm talking about, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Mr. Grant, let me explain something first. Minister of Works has traditionally been, and listen to this carefully, the Minister of Works has traditionally been the minister that we know is in charge of the Department of Works, BEC, in charge of water and sewage, BTC, and all of the utilities. But somehow, Nico Grant got appointed and get the name Minister of Works, but we did some research. And the only thing we could find under his portfolio is road and traffic and maintenance. So I say, something funny about this one. We do some research further. You know how we just go at Citizens Review. We come to bring you some sense. And we found out, like we all know, he was a substantive Minister of Tourism, along with hotshot Brian McCartney. And we hear, now, this is what we hear. They do so bad in tourism that Papa had to reassign him to a next job. And people forget Granville McCartney was in tourism, you know. And all two of them is doing foolishness. But anyway, they had to bring in fast talker, Vanderpool Wallace, good man from Government High, graduated with my daddy, to fix things in tourism, even offering Bahamians companion fly free to the outer islands. Now I say companion, not free sweetheart, companions. What do you think would have happened if we would have allowed those other fellas to stay in tourism? Anyway, we ain't gonna speculate. That's too much. All I know is the Minister of Works ain't in charge of the Department of Works, and the Minister of Environment in charge of that. Mr. Grant must be the Minister of something else. I declare here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that Nico Grant is the Minister of Roads and Maintenance, and no Minister of Works that we know about. Papa, I know you and Dominica, But you got to stop trying to pull these fast ones on us, you know. Around here calling the fella something, and you know he ain't doing that work. Anyway, let me get back to the point. Mr. Grant, if it's one thing that you should have learned from Paul Christie, is that you ask people and you talk to people before you go making big changes in people's life. Consult, man. Now, I know what you're going to say. Y'all are my viewers, and I know what you're going to say. Paul Christie would have taken all day. He would have keep asking you and consulting with this one and talking to that one. And then next thing you know, you run out of time, election come, party lose, and he can't help you. But that ain't what I saying. Because y'all always going to the extreme. Minister, if you're going to make major changes that affect people, talk to people first. Ask them. Ask them how they feel about it. We know you're going to do it anyway, you know. Because it's your job to do what you feel is best to secure the road and traffic and maintenance of the Bahamas. But talk to us. At least have a couple of forums to let us know what's going on. It's you who got Cable Bahamas, ZNS, and JCN News running around the place, my 5 cents, and people shoving mic in their mouth talking about what you think about this and what you think about that. The reason why they're doing that is because the people never got a chance in the first place to say what they feel. Another thing, somebody tell me how come Jose Castellanos could come here all the way from wherever they're from to fix road in the Bahamas. Why ain't in a Bahamian company? That's the first question. And if there's a sensible answer, just give it to me. That's all we ask. And since you all say we can't do it, then I've heard that Jose Castellanos can't do business in Jamaica because Jamaica finds bad business practices. Now, I've heard that. We can check it out, and we can bring you the facts next week. But what we doing goddamn building road around here? And if I could say so myself, I don't know what Jose Castellanos know that Bahamian road builders don't know. Because it don't seem like much different to me. Now, y'all fellas who driving around here with these cars with them big rim know what I talking about. Because y'all still got to be bobbing and weaving around these vent and manhole that lower than the level of the road. The road paved up here and the vent dip down low so you got to keep breaking up your car and doing all kind of stuff. Why they don't fix them? If you can do half a job for $100 million, let Bahamians get paid for that. We ain't got to find no foreign company just to smooth off the road and pay them no $100 million. If you can come here with an infrastructure plan and the road can be built up properly, in the middle of the road it come up so like that, and the water slide off the road into the catchment and the sidewalk come up so, you know, real world, we just see them, we know what they look like. But for $100 million, give us the money if you can just smooth off the road. That don't make no sense. When I ride around on these new roads, water still catching in the road. A little bit of rain and the water catching. If you can just smooth off road, give the money to Bahamians. Let it be an economic boost for us, not for them. Use it on us. Because, you know, every time the F&M get in power, they just spend $100 million on road. And I don't think the Minister of Conflict of Interest, who get a sweet piece of that road contract, Simonet, don't let them have to do what they do to you last time when you had to come out the cabinet because you didn't know who company was who and what company was what and which one owned this one and who owned that one. We ain't fool, you know. And Citizens Review is watching, my brother. Anyway, as I close this week, I'll tell you like I said last week. We are but dust, and to dust we shall return. So you got to say what you got to say while you're here. Because like everything else, you can't carry it with you. And Ronnie Butler keeps saying, everybody want to go to heaven, but ain't nobody want dead. That's our show for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I certainly had a good show with Lorenz Wright, our new guest host, and we'll try to bring on some extra interesting people next week. Thanks for joining us.